So I just pressed record. Here we go. My name is Laura Halpin. I am a nutritionist who practices in the San Francisco Bay Area, Walnut Creek, California, on the stolen land of the Bay Miwoks. I use she, her pronouns. And I really want to welcome everyone who's on the call now and across time and space. And just to introduce myself to those of you who haven't met me before, over the past, I would say 2 or 3 years, I've become much more interested in the impact of the way we live on our collective health, as opposed to the work that I have done previously, which is focus on individual health. And so the thing that I say over and over to my clients is, it's not all about broccoli. And our lives are expressing themselves within systems that we really have to become aware of, because they're far more impactful on our health than our individual practices. And so anyway, that's me. These collective health conversations have grown out of that interest in just kind of making the connection between what's happening in a person's individual life and how it reflects back and forth on the collective. And I am just delighted and really excited to have Kerra Bolton here today on the call. And I have communicated probably every place I have communicated about this call that I am so excited. And it was really just finding out about Kerra's project that there was a really strong pull. And I'm learning how just to trust those pulls. And so I made a bold leap and invited Kerra Bolton into this conversation. And so Kerra, I just want to welcome you. I think I made you a co-host, didn't I? Let me see if I need to. I'm going to make you a co-host right now. Okay.
Thank you so much for the invitation. And I see a couple of familiar faces. I'm so happy to see you guys. And for the faces I don't know yet, I'm so glad that you came. I'm glad that you took time out of your day and to spend it with Laura and me. So thank you so much.
Yeah. So Kerra Bolton, for those of you who don't know her, is she's a writer, a filmmaker, a visual artist, which I don't know that, I don't know that piece yet, who creates soul food for thought stories, and works at the intersection of travel, culture, and politics. And it was interesting to me because I recently watched an interview with you, Kerra, and you introduced yourself as a filmmaker, a writer, and an ancestored being. Mm-hmm. And so I just wanted to, I've never heard anyone refer to themselves as an ancestored being. And so I wanted to hear you tell us more about that.
Well, for me, an ancestored being, I'm 46 years old, and my immediate family is gone. They're all, they've predeceased me. So that's my parents, my grandparents, my uncle. And so I'm single, I don't have children, I'm not married. There's my 100-year-old grandmother passed away 2 weeks ago.
I'm so sorry.
And thank you. And so it's like, so instead of identifying myself as a daughter or a this or that or the other, ancestored being to me really describes this place in my life where there are more who are transitioned on the other side of life than I am. And it gives me a connection to them through my ancestors, and not just my immediate family, but all those who came before them. And so it gives me a sense of continuity and identity, even though I feel like an orphan sometimes.
This was a question that I thought I was going to ask later, but I have been following you and understand that you've been doing some ancestry work, and you recently traced back to an ancestor. And I was just hoping that you could tell us a little bit about him and the discovery of him.
So for those who don't know quite what my work is, I am doing a book and a movie. The movie is called Return of the Black Madonna. It's a documentary film that traces my quest to learn how to swim, dive, and map sunken slave ships with a group of Black marine archaeologists. And then the book that inspired the movie is called Water in My Bones. And that really is about sort of learning how to swim and how epigenetic generational fear and trauma carries on, and what we can do to possibly to end the cycle. And so as part of both of the book and the movie project, I have a friend, Lee, who is an ancestor tracker. She's a genealogist. And it's really fascinating because I knew her before we started doing the ancestor tracking together. And she did ancestor tracking with a white woman who discovered that she had both abolitionist and slave traders in her family. And so she and Lee worked out a deal where they gifted me for ancestor tracking. So the woman, who I don't know her name, she remained anonymous, which felt really good to me because that means our connection is sacred. It's not about promoting oneself, but she paid for 2 ancestor tracking sessions for me. And then Lee gifted the other 4. The woman gifted 2, Lee matched her gift with 2. So I got 4 free ancestor tracking sessions as part of my book and film work. And it's been an incredible gift. When I say gifted, I really mean it. Because for many African Americans, most of us don't, unless we have families who are deeply rooted in research, we don't have the names of who our ancestors were, or maybe we have them, but they're like, great grandma Clara. We don't have any documented research, and that research is hard to find. So it took us 3 hours to find my grandfather, 4th great grandfather. His name is Stephen Snell. He was born in slavery in 1814 in Georgia. And he did this miraculous thing 2 years after the American Civil War ended, and that was he registered to vote. So just imagine you're being born into slavery. The Civil War comes, it ends, and you register to vote. I believe he was among 93,000 African Americans who were able to register to vote. And I believe when he voted, he lived in Georgia, and the section where he lived was still a military district. So they were just going under Reconstruction at that time. So that tells me that, we like to say, oh, I am the dream of my ancestors, or I'm the highest hope of my ancestors. And the gift was that I got proof that I really am. And he voted. I mean, just to think he registered to vote in 1867 is just a miracle to me. So I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, no, it was such a meaningful discovery for me just to learn about in your life, and I can see just the continuity in that relationship that you have with your ancestors. How much it must fuel you,
And in my previous life, I was in politics. I was a political journalist for about 7 or 8 years. And then I worked for the North Carolina Democratic Party as its chief spokesperson, doing communications, community outreach, and oppositional research, whatever that meant. I like to put it in air quotes. And for anybody familiar with Scandal, I was basically North Carolina's Olivia Pope. And so the fact that I have this link to an ancestor who registered to vote just really kind of ties it together for me.
Wow. Wow. Could you tell us a little bit, Kerra, about your childhood, like where you're from, a little bit about your family, and also what you were like as a little girl?
Oh, wow, what a great question. Looking back, well, I was born in Philadelphia and I grew up in South Jersey. And for many folks, especially immigrants, European immigrants and African Americans living in the 80s, 70s, and 80s, if you lived in Philadelphia, being able to move to South Jersey was considered a step up. I went to mostly integrated schools. I did go to a mostly Black school in Camden, New Jersey. At the time, it was kind of riddled with like drugs and like crack cocaine was the thing, and there was violence. But it was like the best school I ever went to because they poured so much love and care into kids, especially the kids they thought that could potentially have a great future. And so by the time I was 10 years old, I had gone to United Nations. I went to see Alvin Ailey perform. By the time I was 11 or 12, I started learning Spanish. I could work like the rudimentary things on the computer. When that was big, I was just curious. I read a lot. I loved Anne of Green Gables. That was my favorite book. I talked a lot. I was kind of bossy, but other people couldn't boss me around because I would slap them down pretty quick. I'm like, wow, I've been changed. I love to roller skate. Roller skating was like my favorite thing. I call them our white branch of the family, and they had a red pickup truck. And I loved riding in the back of the red pickup truck and just having the wind blow my hair everywhere. We went
before the days of seatbelts, right?
Yes, exactly. Just put the kids in the back of the pickup truck. If they roll around, they'll be okay. So, yeah, I liked my freedom. I was an only child. When I was 10 years old, maybe 10 or 11, I had organized a neighborhood boycott against Tom and Jerry because I thought the cartoon was too violent. And we had already lived in a violent neighborhood, and I would like organize this letter writing campaign with like the other 10-year-olds on the block. So
that is so cute. So cute. You sound precocious and tagged as such, you know, that if you were, you know, at 10 or 11, you know, clearly there were some signs that there was something special about you. Yeah. So this conversation I named Callings, and so what I'm looking for are the threads. And my question is, what are some of the threads that are woven through your life, whether they're interests or passions or questions that kind of showed up early and have been weaving?
Yeah. For me, they would be writing and social justice in that form. When I was 11, I think I entered like a little local, I guess it was a contest in our school, essay contest, you know, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I said I wanted to be a judge because I wanted everybody to have equal treatment under the law. And I didn't become a judge. I said I wanted to be the first Black woman on the Supreme Court. That was what I wanted to be. And I won the essay contest. And I later discovered that I liked writing more than I liked studying legal issues. I found the legal issues boring, but I loved writing. And I wrote my first short story at 7. So being a writer social justice and caring about how people who are not in the quote unquote mainstream are treated. It's always been important to me. And then artistic expression, whether it's dance or film or writing, that's always been important. Travel is extremely important to me, which it's tough now because we're all under quarantine, but being able to get out in the world and see other people and experience other cultures and speak, have my mouth speak other languages is important.
So you are at the beginning stages of this really incredible project. And I'm wondering if you can kind of walk us into it. So where did the seeds of the return of the Black Madonna start showing up? Yeah, could you just kind of carry us along a little bit?
Sure, it's buckle in. I guess around 2017. So I live in Akumal, which is a coastal community in the Mexican Caribbean. Giselle and I were at a retreat there in 2016. And who knew that I was actually going to live here when we met at the retreat? So I ended up moving here after my mother died in 2016. And it's like I said, it's a coastal community. There's like lots of water activities and I can't swim. And I wanted to be a part of this community, but I had to learn how to swim. And so I started thinking about why can't I swim, and all of the race factors, the structural racism, the family myths, the everything that went into my fear of swimming in open water. And I started to write some things about it, and that became the first draft of Water in My Bones. And so I put it aside for a while because I was really trying to cheat, because I was like, well, maybe it could be a fiction book and I don't actually have to get in the water. I could just like pretend, I could use my imagination. But life does not allow me to cheat. It does not allow me to have any shortcuts. And it did not allow me to put the idea of swimming aside, even though that's what I thought I was going to do. And so when I came here, I was a political communications consultant. Within the first year, I lost all my clients and had to start over. I had no money. So imagine living in another country, not having any money. I commented on a friend's Facebook post, and within an hour, I had a contract with CNN to write an article for them. And then I began writing for CNN. And this is why this is like such a crazy story. So some Jewish guy in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, read my article called How Black Women Saved Alabama and Democracy, about the special election in 2017. And he calls me and he's like, hello, this is Ted Wachtel. And he actually talks like that. I'm not stereotyping. And so Ted gave me a call and said that he was interested in my work, and he had independent means, and would I be interested in working with him? And I said, well, I tentatively said yes. He sent me to Detroit to talk about, to learn more about restorative practices in Detroit, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And then based on my work in restorative practices and learning more about Detroit, he then paired me with a documentary filmmaker, Cassidy Friedman, out of San Francisco, and said, I want you guys to go back to Detroit, and I want you to capture restorative practices in Detroit, which we spent last year doing. And Cassidy was like, we don't have a film here. He's like, we have videos, but all we have are like you showing up, hugging people. Like, that's all we've got. Like, we don't have, there's no conflict, there's nothing. There's just you hugging people and listening. And so we need some conflict. And he said, I remember when you said that you wanted to learn how to swim. Can we film you in Mexico learning how to swim? And of course I said, hell no, like I'm 46 years old. I have a middle-aged woman's body. Like nobody wants to see that. And so he said, no, Kerra, I think this is really going to be awesome. And I think you can do this. And, you know, he talked to me for 2 hours to convince me that we should do this. So we filmed in Mexico where I live. And we got a wonderful swim instructor as a Black man who also had the same issues about swimming and open water, and he overcame those issues by becoming like an expert swimmer and a swim instructor. And so my first day was bobbing up and down in the water 20 times. And after like the 5th or 6th time, I kept getting these visions of slave ships. I kept feeling like I was underwater. There was this experience that I don't want to call it an out of body experience because I don't want to sound too woo woo, but it was this experience that was very transformative. And I kept hearing ancestors. I kept seeing Black bodies. I kept hearing chains. I kept hearing bodies rocking against the slave ships. And every time I went down, it was over and over and over. That's what I kept hearing. And so I let the idea kind of sit for a day. And then I said to Cassidy, I said, I want to go, and when I finish learning how to swim, I want to dive and I want to map sunken slave ships. And this is going to be my new work. And he was startled because of course he would be. And we talked about how we were going to execute that. And that became sort of the Return of the Black Madonna film, or the makings of it. I know that's a long story.
No. It's amazing. And I think one of the things that I'm always fascinated by is the different people that are planted in random places that help you pivot or give you a leg up or whatever. And so, you know, I know that you're connected to Ted Wachtel's work. Wachtel. And I've seen you mention him and refer to his work over and over again. But he was the one that kind of like plucked you up and, you know, so there's just been, it seems like a pretty influential relationship there.
Yeah, he's my mentor and friend and client, and we have so much in common. We're very alike in our temperament and approach to the world. He's a visionary, which I'm not, and so a lot of the professional work that I do with Ted is kind of building structure around his ideas. And in turn, he pays me to explore this world of restorative practices and do films and books about it.
And for those of you who are listening, I'll send out a follow-up email, and there will be links to the things that Kerra refers to, just so you could do your own sleuthing around those things. Okay, so my next question is, how has this project become more than what you originally had in mind? And you already kind of, like, it's snowballing, it seems, as you're telling me about it. But I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about, go back to the fear of swimming, because I also see in your work that you're linking out to, it's not a story about you, but it has more social impact than just your story.
Yeah. And I still can't swim yet. I mean, I've had 2 swim instructors now. The first one, it was very difficult to get to him. The second one, she was wonderful and we were making progress, but then the pandemic hit. And so we had to end our swim lessons. It's like when I'm in the water, my body naturally wants to float. It naturally wants to have this relationship with water. But because of my fear of water, I get scared when my feet don't touch the ground or I can't touch the ground immediately. And so in my research for water in my bones, what I found was that many West African communities actually they were fishing villages. They were strong, they had a lot of strong swimmers, and there was actually a precursor to the breaststroke that the Europeans didn't actually practice until 1899, but it was prevalent in these African communities, and women swam as well, which was not something we did a lot in the Western society. So that was kind of interesting. And what I found was, and a little bit of is I don't want to say myth, but it's not documented in a rigorous way. So the things that I'm about to share now are my theories, and I want to be really clear about that. But what I found in my research was that that people that I think it was during the transatlantic slave trade, there were these myths about Mami Wata, which was sort of the mermaid myth of the African and of West Africa and the Caribbean. And Mami Wata is like this water spirit, sort of a mermaid. She is either a protectress or she can hurt you. And all these stories about fearing the water, because obviously mothers didn't want the African mothers, and I'm using African in a broadest sense, but the specter of the transatlantic slave trade was present. And so mothers didn't want their kids getting in the water because they were afraid that the kids would get kidnapped. And so these Mami Wata myths started to spring up. And so there was that's the first kind of currents of fear that I was able to trace. And then when the African Americans, the enslaved Africans came to the United States, swimming was outlawed because they feared that that was one way of escape. And there's a story, an apocryphal story about the Underground Railroad, that it was really about an escaped enslaved person who escaped via water, underwater, and I think it was in Ohio, and not actually what we think of as the Underground Railroad. So swimming was thought of by the masters as a potential way of freedom. So many enslaved people were forbidden to learn how to swim, even though some enslaved people saved their masters who were drowning. So that was the first part of it. And then as pools became open in the early 20th century, we had, of course, segregation, and we didn't have pools in many Black communities. And even in the 60s and 70s, when you saw the proliferation of pools in Black communities, most white people went to the country club, or they went places where they could segregate themselves. So pools and swimming began, even in the Black community, was thought of as, that's something that white people do. We don't do that. And so it became socially acceptable not to know how to swim. And we know that Black children drown at 3 times the rate of white children and twice the rate of Hispanic Latino children. So not knowing how to swim has deadly consequences for our children. And part of the book and the film is to raise questions about, why don't we know how to swim? Why do we have this fear? And when I talk to Black women individually, they'll tell me their stories about being afraid of swimming in open water. So it's real. And it was also a way that I could tie in the fear of swimming along with ancestral research and identity and race issues that preoccupy me, because most of for example, the 1619 Project about slavery and its impact on the United States, it's land-based. And for me, the missing link was the Middle Passage and what happened to those enslaved Africans who either drowned or went overboard or who committed suicide. What happened in those boats? And I feel like for me, I won't have a complete understanding of who I am as an ancestor being, as a Black woman living in Mexico, until I understand that missing link. Because they endured something in that water.
Right.
And my other crazy theory is that, and I've actually done research. I researched all of the hurricane research, all of the hurricanes since we were able to track it in the late 1800s, the Atlantic hurricanes. And I found that most of these hurricanes start with a westerly wind in East Africa. They go across the continent and they basically follow the slave trade routes. I mean, that's why we call them the trade winds.
Wow.
And so I have this theory that some of the hurricanes, it's like all of that energy, that ancestral anger and pain and energy from the enslaved Africans that went overboard. That's one of my theories that I'll explore in the book, probably not in the movie.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Just the, it's amazing how, again, like it goes back to the very first question about you being an ancestor being, and how it's almost like you're weaving with your ancestors, and you're made up of your ancestors and their experience, and also a more immediate cultural and racial issues that have shaped your relationship with the water. And so the motion in your thinking about this is really fascinating.
Thank you. I'm glad it makes sense. It's just sort of, it's all kind of coming together.
Yeah. So the reason that my radar went up as soon as Sarah, who was on the call, I don't think she is on the call. As soon as Sarah mentioned your name and your project, was because I had just become interested in the Black Madonna. I'd never heard of her before, and I was looking for books about her. And so I had this kind of like curiosity, and here you are with this project called The Return of the Black Madonna. And so I wanted to ask you about her, and who is she? Who is she to you? And how is it that she figures in the name of this project, this journey?
So I come from a Baptist tradition, a Baptist religious tradition, and it's predominantly male. And the women are the nurses that serve the water when somebody has the Holy Spirit and they fall out. They may or may not be a pastor. They may or may not be a deaconess. But women in the Black Baptist Church have always been sidelined. And no disrespect to the man on the call, but I think women are the most spiritual beings on the planet. And we give life for those of us who can, but in some ways, even if we can't physically give life, a lot of times we give life through our love and our care and our attention. And so for me, the Black Madonna is, broadly speaking, it's Mother Earth. Broadly speaking, it is the divinity that I don't get a chance to experience in the church of my ancestors. It allows me to, the Black Madonna allows me to connect to the ocean. She allows me to connect to my higher wisdom. She allows me to connect to the wisdom in others, and to, in my moments of grace, see them as children, as we all are, trying to find our way. She's a beacon to me. There's a fierceness about her. In terms of the film, in Detroit, there is the Shrine of the Black Madonna, which was the touch point for Black politics after the 1967 riots in Detroit. And they would meet at the Shrine of the Black Madonna, and it led eventually to the election of Detroit's first Black mayor. So that's how it figured directly into the movie. And then when the movie switched from being something about Detroit to my quest to swim and dive and map sunken slave ships, we kept it because the spirit was still there.
Mm. Mm. It's really amazing. I just am I just am so struck by this kind of the return of the Black Madonna is really like a, and this is all first draft thinking, and it's probably stuff that you've thought so long and hard about, but it's this resurgence of you, resurgence of Black women. It's really powerful.
And the resurgence of an energy that we desperately need right now.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I mean, one of the things that when I meditate, show if I can show you guys, kind of like that's the jungle. That's my yard, so to speak. And I meditate, and I always face the jungle when I meditate. I usually meditate mornings or evenings. And I see the breeze through the trees, and it feels like I can see the earth breathing. The beach is about a 15-minute walk from my house. And again, it's like I can see the earth breathing. And I think for me, the return of the Black Madonna is that breath that's coming back to us. It's that breath, that energy that's coming back to us, and it's clearing everything away. Everything that is that doesn't work for us, or that is oppressive, that harms our spirit. It's clearing that away.
So we taught, the word callings came to me when I was trying to figure out how to name this conversation, and so I want to kind of resurface that. And, would you talk about this project, and would you talk about this path you're on as a calling?
Yeah, the weird thing is, it's like callings never come the way we expect them to. And I've always been drawn to work and working. For me, that's always been a place where there's been dignity and creativity. And I remember in my 20s buying whatever the self-help book of the week, and like trying to say, what is my calling? What is my calling? What is my calling? Going to workshops. I spent thousands of dollars in a year-long mastermind course, trying to figure out what my calling was. And I think I didn't understand what the meaning of the word calling is, not the vocabulary, not the Latin root, but the fact that it's something you have to listen to. It's not, or listen for. It's not something that you determine what it is. It finds you, and your work is to just be open to receive it. That's what your work is. It's not to like figure out, well, what did I like to do as a child? And what are things that, like, that's nice, busy work, but that's not the real work of finding your calling, or having your calling find you. And then once you prepare your spirit to receive it, to listen to it, then the other part is like you have to obey. So for me in 2015, in November 2015, I knew I was leaving the United States. Didn't know where I was going to live. I thought I was going to live in Paris because that sounds really romantic and expensive. But I live in Mexico, and everybody made fun of me, and they're like, what if you're on the wrong side of the wall? And I'm like, well, then I'm living in a country that doesn't require walls to keep people out. And so here we are. So following your calling and being obedient to it, even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable, is the hardest part.
So what do you, and I fully admit that neither one of us are experts on callings, but what do you think it is? What do you think is a calling? And how is it different from like, I have this job and I really love it?
Well, for me, a calling is spirit led, and it is something that arises from your life. It could be a series of lessons that you both have to learn and teach. Um, and it is something that can be uncomfortable sometimes. And I really want to emphasize that, not because I'm trying to downplay callings, but people think that callings are about what they want. And it's not, it's about what the universe wants from you, and what your divine assignment is. And to me, that's what a calling is. I mean, like, you know, it sounds really cool to say that I'm swimming and I'm diving and eventually I'm going to map sunken slave ships, but like, I'm scared shitless. And a lot of this is uncomfortable. You know, even the making of the film, that sounds so glamorous. Like, oh, you're making a documentary film. Well, my director and I fight like constantly. We care about each other, but we fight all the time. And so it's like, you know, and we're scrapping for money. I mean, it's not a glamorous thing, but I can't not do it.
Mm-hmm. 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 So it sounds like, okay, I'm just going to kind of pull from what you've said. So a calling is something that you don't work your way toward, it works its way toward you. So there's a call. It sounds like there's a logic to it, but there's like an illogical component to it too. Like you can't see where it's coming from or how all of the, you know, just about the people that show up and say, turn here, you know. And it also sounds, you know, just from looking at what's ahead and where you've been, that there's almost like a crucible involved, you know, like it'd be really nice if your calling was just to like write really cool films in Paris, but no, you have to like go into the water and it scares you and it's so much, you know.
But it's not about, again, you know, it's not about me bossing around the universe and saying, this is what I want.
No,
it's about me surrendering and listening to what life wants from me. And it wants me to face my fears. It wants me to become this other being. As I say in the video that we did, our fundraising video, it's about who I become while I do this. And it's about embodying an experience, not just looking at it objectively. And so we have to embody our experiences, I believe, instead of judging them and looking at them from a distance and evaluating them.
Lindsay Para talks about how, and I've never said this out loud before, so it may come out wrong, but you're journeying, but your journey is journeying you. You know, there's there's a relationship. Okay, so this is my next question. Do you think that everyone has a calling?
Yes. Oh gosh, yes. I believe everyone has a calling. And I know I've kind of drifted into the spiritual realm and not so much in the earthly, but everyone has a calling, and it's just a matter of listening to it, and listening for it. And it may not be this grand quest, but it could be like this area of your life that you feel called to serve.
I remember Elizabeth Gilbert, the author of Eat, Pray, Love and other things, but she did I don't know if it was a TED Talk, but it was a talk about the difference between passion and curiosity, and that we're all like, find your passion, and we're waiting for the lightning bolt to like strike us, and yes, this is it. And so often people never find that, they never experience it, but it's the breadcrumbs or the threads through our lives, the things that we're curious about, oh, come over here, that can be so much more subtle and gentle and hard to track, you know?
Yeah. Are you asking me what I believe? What do I think about that?
I just thought I'd throw it in there. Because I do think that, you know, like my kids who are in their early 20s have been raised in this culture where it's all about finding your passion. And it's like, do we have to be that passionate? Like, you know, like some people never know what their passion is. And so I just think that, I guess I'm just stating for me and everybody else here that it may not come as dramatically as it has to you, you know?
Well, I mean, a lot of that find your passion business has also come as a result of personal and business development. And it's come as the zeitgeist of technology and the workplace have changed. And it has been used in service of thinking about how we work. And without getting too political,
You can.
I think that when we try to enslave our passions in the service of capitalism, it never does us good. It never helps us. It's another ego-based system that we've conformed to. And I think that your true calling will never ask you to be enslaved to capitalism. I'm saying that while I'm doing my branding for my book and my film. But the way that I look about it, that is like, that's not my calling. My calling is the swimming and the diving and the slave ships. It's not this other stuff that I'm doing.
It's not the product.
No, it's not the products at all. Those are just manifestations that I'm trying to communicate to larger audiences.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that the power of stories is really, you know, both the stories that we tell about ourselves and the stories that we hear really can shape our experience in the world. It can shape the way that we see other people. And I loved what you said in the video. I believe we don't change until we change the stories we tell about ourselves and each other. And so I was hoping that you would say a little bit about that, because as a writer, you're a storyteller.
Yeah, I mean, we all tell ourselves stories all the time about who we are, who somebody else is. And we tend to think that those stories are always true, and they're not. And so I have a funny example and I have a not so funny example, maybe. The funny example is, as you can see, I have a gap between my teeth. And that's because my parents couldn't afford braces. And I was teased as a kid because I had this big gap between my teeth. And even when I meet kids now and they're like, there's a space between your teeth, and they think they're just discovered something. And I'm like, oh my God, I don't want to hit my friend's child. And, but the way that it was later explained to me, someone said, you know, there are African communities where a gap between your teeth is considered a sign of beauty. And so once I had that new story that the gap between my teeth wasn't something to be ashamed of, but it was a mark of beauty, I just embraced it. And I've never wanted to get braces. I never wanted to fix it. It's just a thing that makes it me.
Yeah.
Another story, not quite so funny, but it has to tie in with the movie, is that but in October, we filmed The Last Meeting with me and my grandmother. And I hadn't seen her in over 10 years. And
wow.
The story that I made up was that my grandmother was this smothering presence, and I did not want to be smothered. after the death of my father, her son, in 2007. And I had stayed away, and then I felt guilty about it. And I had gone to ask her for her forgiveness. Granted, she's 100 years old. She lives in a nursing home. She has dementia. And I'm literally throwing myself in her lap, crying and apologizing for leaving her, for abandoning her, for a story that I had in my head. And she said, all I ever wanted was for you to be happy. And I know that you needed to leave the United States for your mental health. And I just want you to be happy. And of course, that made me cry even more. And then she's like, stop crying, because then I'm going to start crying. But I had this story in my head of who my grandmother was. And had I not gone to see her, she would have died 2 weeks ago, and I would have still had that story in my head, and I would have been punishing myself for having that story. And so that's a way that the stories that we tell ourselves can harm us.
And it's almost like those stories just need to see the light of day, because they don't get resolved when they're like floating around in the badlands of our brains, you know? Like, I think about the stories that I've told about people that I've been in relationships with, and by the time it finally comes out, it's so distorted and so far from, you know, who that person really is. And so I wondered if anybody on the call has any questions or comments, and you're welcome to, if you want to unmute yourself and just ask a question. If you're not comfortable with doing that, you can put a comment in the chat box. Somewhere on your screen, there should be like a little toolkit, and you will see a dialog box that says chat, so you can put a comment there if you'd like. But any questions? I like to think that there's a reason that each one of you are here.
I have a question.
Hello, Giselle.
Hi, Kerra. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm excited. Thank you for being for being here and for sharing your story. You know how much I'm always inspired by your journey. And I have just this question, because there is we met in Akumal at this retreat in 2016, 17? 17. 16, right? And you were the first person I met at the retreat, and we had this conversation because I had invited you. We had, you know, I was gonna do some sightseeing, and I had invited you, and you had mentioned to me how you know, like, and you were just upfront. You said, you know, I'm you know, afraid, or, you know, like fear. I don't know. That's what I remember from my point of experience. Like there was like some fear, and you were super honest in sharing this, and then seeing your journey. At that point, you were still living in the United States, and you went to live in Akumal, and so just like I'm wondering how you mentioned about that you had to prepare your spirit to kind of like to be able to be in that space to listen to your calling. And whether, you know, that, you know, at that point, was that a point where you started preparing your spirit, or what happened? And, or if there was something that shifted for you, that was like a clear shift that helped you open up to receive this from source.
Well, thank you so much for asking that question. And yes, Giselle wanted to go to one of the cenotes here, which are the freshwater pools here. And I was like, no, I'm not going to go to a cenote. I'm not going to get in the water. But for me, my stepdad used to say, a hard head makes for a soft ass. And so I had been living a lot as a hard-headed being. And when I was in a relationship that ended, actually, it was so strange because I was in an adult relationship with the guy that I lost my virginity to at 16. Another story for another call. But that relationship ended, and I realized that I was not going to have the white picket fence and the husband and the children, and that dream was dead. And I had to dream a new dream for myself. And so in 2015 is when the whispering started. It wasn't a calling yet, but it was a whispering. And by the time Giselle and I met, it was still a whispering. But as I said, a hard head makes for a soft ass. And so when I moved to Mexico, like everything was stripped from me. So all of my identity, all of the ego, all of the markers, like everything I tried to have to hold on to my whole life was completely stripped from me. And I had to readjust. And when I hit rock bottom, when all my clients left me and I didn't have any money, that's when the listening happened, because I had no choice. And I had to surrender, and I had to trust in what life was telling me, and trust that it was going to be okay. And even if it was not okay, I had to trust that somehow I was going to make it to the other side. And so it was that process of surrendering. And I hope that not everyone else's journeys are like this dramatic. I hope you can just be open, and like the universe just gives you what you want. But for me, it really had to call for my attention.
Wow.
So good to
Thank
see
you. What a good question. Thanks, Giselle.
And then every day, I mean, for me, meditation, journaling, walking to the beach, sometimes dancing helps, like just to move around and have that sense of expansiveness allows me to receive.
Okay, there's a question that's come in. And I don't know if it's Nania Hoffman. What is it?
It's Nanea.
Nanea. She writes, do you think you would have found your way to this calling if you'd stayed in the States? Or would you perhaps found a different one?
That's a great question. I think, no, I don't think I would have found this calling if I'd stayed in the States. And I think that my calling was to leave the United States. I am a proud American. I mean, I shouldn't have to say that, but I do need to, I feel like I need to say this. In Mexico, I'm viewed as an American. They don't see me as Black. Occasionally they do, but for them, I'm just a gringa, just a brown one. And, but the United States is too noisy for me. It was noisy before all of this started to happen. And I couldn't concentrate, and racism was just like the boot on the heel of my neck, and I couldn't breathe. And in Mexico, I have the kind of privilege that white people have in the United States. And while I don't think that that's great, but it's like, I don't have to think about race every day. And not having to think about race every day frees my mind to think of other things, which I end up thinking about race, but it gives me the distance to think about it in a way that isn't where I'm not just dealing with trauma, which is how I was living in the United States. I was very traumatized.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I just had a comment.
Sure.
Thank you. I'm really impressed by your story. I'm also an American who left the States. I live in Canada now, but I'm here temporarily as a student. So I don't know if I'll be able to stay. But I heard on a podcast from the CBC about myth. And when you mentioned myth and you kind of corrected it, it's a beautiful quote from the author who wrote Wolf Hall, Hilary Mantel. And she defined myth as truth cast as symbol and metaphor, which I've loved that quote ever since. And so it gave me a way to embrace the word myth. Yeah.
Thank you for that, because a lot of my family story it's not truthful, it's truthy. And so I've accepted it as myth. And that helps me,
Yeah.
because I don't know whether my grandfather actually played with Miles Davis and Johnny Cash and Patti LaBelle, but he told me he was smoking weed at the time. So of course it's true. But but like myth just kind of allows me to embrace whatever stories that come. So thank you for that.
Mm. Bryn, can you say that one more time so I can write it down?
Yes, it's truth cast as symbol and metaphor.
Mm.
Thank you.
And the show is on the CBC. There's a CBC show called Ideas. It's a radio show.
Okay.
Which you can find the podcast. I don't remember. Actually, I might be able to even give you the date. Let me see.
You could put it in the chat box so we can all
Okay. It was
check it out.
October 2017 that the show was originally aired. But I think you could find it as a podcast. I'll put it in the chat.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments?
I'm just so happy to see everyone. I just love seeing your faces, and for the faces I can't see, I'm just happy to see your names. I'm glad that you're here. It makes me happy.
It's nice. It really is nice. I think there's some refuge, to come inside and hear a story away from the storm of the news. And well, I had another question about just the financial support and backing that this project needs. And I feel like the more that I read about the social impact of the project, the more it feels like it's a story worth telling for, reasons far beyond you. And so I just wanted to hear about what your needs are and what your financial needs are. And also if you could tell us a little bit more about the social impact. You were talking about the statistics around Black children drowning, and that's huge and not anything that I knew. So anyway, big question.
Sure. Well, we'll do the money first and the impact. So kind of leave everybody with that. The film cost roughly $364,000 to make. We have 20,000 of that. And we raised a lot of that through our crowdfunding in December and January. And there's some folks on the call here who've given to us, and we really just appreciate your donation. Right now, that 20,000 is parked in a bank account in San Francisco. We haven't spent any of it. Our goal was to spend some of it making a scene select so that we could invite investors, grant making organizations, and other folks who wanted to donate to our film. You can donate to us tax-free continually at the Film Collective. And I think, Laura, you might have the link on your, so we are
and I'll include it in the follow-up email so you don't have to go look for it.
So we have that. We also, before the COVID hit, we've been working on corporate sponsorships, and we had a tentative yes from the Hyatt Corporation to put us up in their hotel in Playa del Carmen, which is my happy place. But they had agreed to put us up for a week as part of corporate sponsorship for the film. So I mentioned that because I know that money is tight for everybody right now. But that we were in the midst of all this, we were still trying to be independent, and we were still trying to get money from various sources. But we just really need help in spreading the word and about the film. And I'm in the process of creating more content around it. So it's a way to stay in touch with people. I don't know when we'll be able to film again. We hope for later this year, depending on the travel restrictions and when things open up. So that's our hope, that we were going to actually film in May, but our part of Mexico is closed for another month. So we're looking at late summer, early fall as another potential filming window. But we'd like to film, and films cost money. So if there's any way that you can spread the word, or if you know people, it's just really, or even in-kind donations we're taking. So in terms of the social impact, I see it.
And could I just interrupt? Do you mind?
Sure.
I just want to kind of underline the point that you made. And, before, when you were talking about the connections that come when somebody has a calling, I think that it's interesting that we're all here on this call to hear your story, and that it may be in the retelling of this story that we tell it to someone who tells it to someone else, who tells it to someone else, who believes in you and wants to offer money. And so I just want us all to see ourselves as potential allies for the magic that needs to happen to get you the support you need.
Well, if Tiger King can be a hit on Netflix, surely our film can do something, that can give people something, a little bit of hope, a little bit of, I struggle because there is the glamour puss in me, which I've attempted in COVID, it was my COVID hair, but there's the glamour puss in me that wants to present this like fully made up, fully gorgeous version of myself being a mermaid in the Caribbean. And then there's like the actual version of me who is like, has these big goggles on, and I'm afraid, and my bathing suit's falling off, and it's just a hot freaking mess. And but I know that the gift is in the hot mess, not in the perfection that I would rather present to people. And I'm hoping that if people see me struggle with my fears, that they're liberated to look at their fears. I'm hoping that Black women get encouraged to learn how to swim for themselves and their children, because a lot of the drownings happen where the kids can't swim, and then none of the adults around can swim either. So I'm hoping that changes. And then to encourage the exploration among African Americans. I mean, the diving community is mostly white, and it would just be great to have the diving community be a mixture of the people who are also on land. And just imagine if we could all care for our oceans. So those are the areas of impact that speak the most to me. And then, of course, it's the ancestral identity issues.
Thank you. Before we close, another thing that was really interesting to me was your writing about the power of circles. And I can't remember if you actually, I know that I saw your writing about sitting in a circle. But I was wondering if you could talk just a little bit about that. And, this is a circle of sorts here. And so can you tell us what you see in circles?
Well, as we know that sitting in circles it's a primordial function being. We all sat around the campfire. We remember as kids like sitting in a circle and playing duck, duck, goose, or having stories told to us. And so circles is like a primary function. And when I learned in restorative practices that there's actually formalized circles for different things, whether it's to discover a problem, whether it's to build relationships, whatever those circles are about. And I talked about communities of care after my grandmother died because, you know, I'm single, I'm living alone. When my grandmother died, there wasn't like somebody could hug me and talk to me and I could cry in their arms. I didn't have that. And it made the isolation so much worse. But it was coming together in a Zoom call. I did an online memorial for my grandmother. Some of the people on this call were also on the Zoom call. And I saw all their faces. And I really started to cry because I was filled with so much love. Like I could feel their love and they could feel my love. And I felt like we were honoring my grandmother in that love that we brought together. And I think that we need more circles, whether they're Zoom, I know everybody has Zoom fatigue, or when we're allowed to talk to each other, to come together. And you can even have a circle of 3 people. It doesn't have to be an enormous group of people, but just to come together and to offer something. So in Detroit, they would say, I have one hand to give and I have another hand to receive. And so if we could all have one hand to give and another hand to receive, I just think it's a small way of making things better for all of us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Is there anything that you feel like sharing with us that I didn't ask you about, or anything that's top of mind for you?
No, if people want to find me, I'm on Facebook, on Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest. I'm redoing my website, so don't go to that because that's horrible at the moment. But
there's a lot of good stuff there. I've been mining your website, and there's lots of good stuff.
I'm trying to put, it's like my writing is there, but I would love to be in conversation with you and to get to know you and what you care about. And so I just offer that invitation.
That's so nice. Thank you. Brent, did you have a comment?
I'm just curious if people would feel comfortable just saying where we are.
Okay.
Around the circle, just because, I mean,
thank you.
One thing that's great about Zoom is, especially in this time of isolation, because I live alone too, is, you know, like people from very diverse and faraway places being able to connect. So
yeah, that'd be awesome. I'd love to know where people are joining us.
I can start. I'm in Vancouver, British Columbia. So
awesome.
I'm in Miami, Florida, and originally from Dominican Republic.
Yes, my Dominican sister.
Yes.
I'm in
I'm in North Georgia, 40 miles north of Atlanta, in Gainesville by the Olympic rowing venue.
Thank you, Evelyn. It's good to see you.
Thank you.
I'm in Pleasant Hill, California, Northern California.
Thank you for joining us, Natalie.
Enjoyed it.
Sarah is in Mountain View, California.
Hi, I'm in lovely Walnut Creek, California, originally from Iran and grew up in Boston, Massachusetts, and moved to California, Northern California, about 5 years ago. And I follow Laura wherever she goes. Thank you. It was great conversation. Appreciate that.
Yeah, so good. There's more Bay Area folks, Sarah, who introduced us. I just lost the chat thing. In Mountain View, Nanea, did I say that right now? In Santa Clara. So there's a lot of Northern California people.
Thank you.
And Evelyn wrote, thank you, Kerra, for your vulnerability, which makes me feel more human. It's nice to meet you. I think it's nice to meet me. Thank you. San Diego, Roxana. Yeah.
I'll say hi from St. Louis, Missouri.
Thank you for joining us from the Midwest.
Yes. Hi, Lyndon.
Hi.
Hi, Roxana. Thank you for joining. Barbara's from Milwaukee. Thank you.
Wow, this is great. That was such a good question, Bryn. Thank you.
Yes. The world feels comfy. Brief story before we all go. I know people have been really patient, but is that last year I decided I was going to visit one of my best friends. Like I was going to go to his hometown, but he wasn't there. So like, I'm going to stay with your mom and your best friend. So I go to Lancashire, England, Northern England, to visit my friend's mom and his friends. And his mom, who is a widower, was telling me that on her husband's grave, it says, "Make the world one family." And that stuck with me ever since. And so it's like, yeah, let's make the world one family. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much. Kerra, thank you so much for not being offended by me being so curious and wanting to know you.
When you do a documentary, it's just like, okay, I mean, you don't have a life anymore. They really see the inside of everything. So, yeah.
And I want to wish you the best of everything on this journey. My prayer is that you get signs and support and symbols and validation and lots of money to propel you along this really amazing journey.
Thank you. Thank you. And so my prayer for everyone is that the highest good come to you today and every day. And on the days that you feel not quite so there, just to know that I love you and I care about you and I'm keeping you in my prayers. So thank you.
Thank you. All right. So whether you're watching this together with us or you're watching later, just thank you for being here, and thank you for being a person along somebody else's path. Tell them to their calling or to be open to signs for people and helpers along your path. Just wish you all the best of luck, and thank you so much for joining us. And thank you again, Kerra Bolton.
Thank you guys. Take care.
Bye. Take care, everyone. Stay well.
Thank you.
A very special time.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was. Thanks, Sarah. Okay. All right, everybody. Take care. Bye.